Good morning from Zambia, and very good afternoon to you all there in Bangkok. As I think you all know, my name is Nick Hogarth, and I'm the Principal Investigator of FRAME from the Project Coordinating Institution, VITRI, at the University of Helsinki. I really hope you've all been having a good time there in Bangkok, learning a lot in the capacity building training course on the role of higher education institutions in sustainable forest management and bioeconomy. I really wish I could have joined you there in person to give this presentation and to have participated in what sounds like a really interesting few days. But at least I'm glad to be able to participate by giving you this presentation today on the perspectives of forest higher education in the Asia-Pacific region, with special focus on the capacity gaps, needs and future directions. I'd like to thank Damrong and the other organisers for giving me this opportunity to step back a bit and to look at the bigger picture of forest higher education. And through this presentation, I hope to put our work in the FRAME project and that of our respective universities and departments, and even our individual roles into perspective. I'm relatively new to the world of university teaching and being involved in these kinds of forest higher education capacity building projects compared to some of you, because I've only been working at the University of Helsinki for about 7.5 years. But during this time, I've been building my experience and understanding and really learning a lot through my involvement in now 5 different capacity building and forest higher education projects, all of which have been in Southeast Asia. So I'm going to use my presentation today as an opportunity for some reflection on what is part of a lifelong journey of learning with some teaching for me. And I hope that through my presentation, you all can also manage some reflections and perhaps also learn something too. Fortunately for us as forest educators and researchers, although perhaps not so fortunately for the forests have become increasingly in the international spotlight. The Asia-Pacific region's forests make vital contributions to societies and economies and have an important role in the efforts to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as a range of national and local issues, and to tackle climate and ecological crises that the world is now facing. Building capacity in this globally significant burgeoning sector is therefore needed to not only support national and subnational development priorities related to sustainable forest management and bioeconomy, but also to facilitate the integration of individual countries into global coalitions and their commitments such as the Bonn Challenge, Paris Climate Change Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. The most efficient and enduring way to achieve this is by improving the quality and accessibility of forest-related higher education and produce a new generation of professionals who are equipped to face all the challenges for the region's forests in order for them to fulfill their potential. But to achieve this, countries will need workforces trained in forestry and a broad range of other forest-related disciplines. However, recent literature highlights that many gaps exist, and there are concerns that forest education is not meeting the fast-changing needs of the world and the region. So with that introduction, I'm now going to present an outline of the presentation, which revolves around 2 very recent high-level assessments of forest education. The first report is very broad on the global assessment of forest education, which was published earlier this year. The next report is narrowing down in the geographical sense on the regional assessment of forest education in Asia and the Pacific. For each report, I will present a summary of the background to the study, the methods used, the key findings and recommendations. Once I have presented these summaries of these reports, I will then provide a synthesis and some conclusions, following which we're going to have some small group breakout sessions to discuss your reflections of how your own institutions, your own courses and teaching and so on sit within this global and regional context that was presented by these reports. Finally, we'll have a group discussion on the relevance and role of frame within the broader context that was presented, and give reflections on future directions for teaching and learning in the context of sustainable forest management, bioeconomy, and lifelong learning. So the first report, the Global Assessment of Forest Education. This report was published in 2022, and it's part of a project called Creation of a Global Forest Education Platform and launch of a joint initiative under Aegis of Collaborative Partnership on Forests. Actually, the lead author, Mika Rekola, is one of my colleagues at the University of Helsinki. You can find this report freely available online. Here's the link. I can share the slides with you later. The Global Forest Education Project ran from 2019 to 2021 and was aimed at assessing the goals, achievements and gaps of forest education at all levels of formal education in order to catalyse and enhance efforts in forest education from local to global levels. The FAO, the International Tropical Timber Organization, and the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, IUFRA, were the lead partners of the project. The project was designed to prepare the foundation for long-term efforts in forest education and included a joint initiative with the Collaborative Partnership on Forests. Among other activities, the project conducted a global survey on forest education, as well as literature reviews and expert consultations in 6 regions. This global assessment report that I'm presenting presents the key findings from all regions and draws common conclusions and provides recommendations at the global level. The aim is to catalyse, accelerate and enhance broad efforts in forest education from global to local levels and to counteract the considerable deficiencies in forest education that exist in many parts of the world. The scope of this report covers education and training related to forests, trees outside forests and other wooded lands such as natural forests, forest plantations, woodlands, agroforests and even urban forests. It includes education delivered through programs of forestry and forest sciences, as well as programs with a broader scope such as natural resource management and environmental sciences. The report covers all levels of formal education, from primary, secondary, technical and vocational education and training, universities and colleges. But the key findings and recommendations in this presentation are focused on the higher education results, or specifically on the university level results. In terms of methods, this global assessment of forest education report relies heavily on 6 regional assessment reports. The regional reports were based on data collected by the Global Forest Education Survey and were supplemented by literature reviews and the findings of regional consultations on forest education with 500 experts. And there was also an international conference on forest education in 2021 as part of this process. There was a total of 2,741 respondents with a ratio of 60% male to 40% female. The respondents came from 3 distinct target groups, and there were 3 different questionnaires issued. First target group was professionals working in organisations, government agencies and the private sector. The second target group were teachers and school administrators from all levels of formal education. And the third group were students and recent graduates from universities and college forest programs. Perhaps some of you completed the survey when it came out. I remember completing it myself. So WebPropol, an online survey and reporting tool, was used to dispatch the surveys and manage the data that was received. And the questions covered a range of topics including education contents and competencies, teaching approaches, educational resources and policy, workplace readiness of students and employability of recent graduates, digital readiness, and general development and trends in education. This figure just highlights the 6 different regions in the Global Forest Education Survey, and highlighted with the red circle is the Asia-Pacific region, which, interestingly, for the results, it includes mostly lower income and middle income countries in Southeast Asia and Southern Asia, but also some high income countries like Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. So the overall averages, you have to keep in mind this. And in this slide, I just wanted to point out the breakdown of the respondents by target groups. It's important for the statistics, but also a breakdown of the contribution to the survey by regions and countries, or just regions in this case. And as you can see highlighted here in red is the Asia and Pacific region, and the total contribution in terms of percentage to the survey was about 16%. So I just want you to keep this in mind, especially for the next report on the regional assessment of forest education in Asia and the Pacific. Okay, so now we get into the key findings for this global assessment of forest education. So the first key finding, gaps and challenges with content of forestry curriculum. There were many gaps and challenges with the content of forestry curriculum. In general, it was found that forest-related higher education has poor coverage of social and cultural values of forest, and much better coverage of biophysical dimensions of forests. Forest resources and forest ecology courses were consistently deemed to have the best coverage, while there was a distinct lack of coverage of forest services and cultural and social issues such as gender, race and ethnicity, and traditional and indigenous knowledge. So the picture that emerges is one of insufficient coverage of social and cultural values of forests, and this happened at all education levels, not just at the university level, and with better coverage of the biophysical dimensions of forests. There was also found to be a general lack of generic skills for graduate students, so masters and PhD. This includes courses or skills such as communication, critical thinking, and collaboration. Teaching approaches and students' exposure to forest was the next key finding. Students at all levels were reported to have limited access to forests. And this obviously has implications for lifelong forest-related learning. At the university level, students had limited opportunities for field experience, internships, and practical training. Another key finding was related to gender and diversity of students. In this day and age, with globalization and equality, it's important to have a diverse and representative group of forest students and eventually forest sector professionals. However, findings in the literature that females and ethnic minorities are more hesitant than their male and ethnic majority counterparts to enroll in forest education at university was reinforced by the findings of this assessment. Employability challenges facing women in some regions were also reported in this study, with a number of women respondents stating that a forest graduate's gender is moderately or very much a factor in their ability to find a job, and even more so in the types of jobs that they're offered. In terms of digital readiness, respondents were generally positive about the value of digital learning tools, but reported that their actual use in practice was less than ideal. At the university level, it was frequently perceived that digital tools cannot replace field education. There were also limitations in some regions reported, which were due to internet accessibility issues, inadequate equipment, and unskilled teachers. Another key finding was in relation to workplace readiness. The assessment revealed that globally, technical vocational educational training and university and college graduates are on average only moderately prepared to enter the workforce. In other words, there is much more room for improvement. Some of the reasons for these non-optimal results are presumably some gaps in curricula, insufficient opportunities for practical training, including in forests, insufficient digital readiness, and some limitations in educational resources or funding. Another finding to wrap this up is about general developments and trends. Globally, there were mixed general development and trends in enrolment in forestry programs at the university level. So enrolment trends vary a lot. In some programs, there are declining numbers of new students, whereas in other programs, enrolment is drastically increasing. The reasons for this are not clear. It's kind of on a case-by-case basis. But in general, environmental awareness in societies is on the rise, and not least because of the topics such as climate change and COVID. Negative images are also often associated with jobs in rural areas and forestry. Therefore, efforts to improve forestry education should go hand in hand with wider efforts to informally educate society on the crucial importance of forests and forest professionals, and of the many opportunities that forests provide for meeting sustainability goals. So this slide is a summary of the recommendations that are provided in the report, and these recommendations are focused specifically at the university level. The report also has recommendations, from all the different education levels from primary school up, and there are also different angles, recommendations for what the government should do, what the private sector should do, etc. But these recommendations are just for academic institutions, university. So the first recommendation is to update curricula to reflect the modern understanding of the values and uses of forests, new technologies used in the forest sector, and the changing demands of the job market. The second recommendation is to increase the focus on issues that this assessment found to be lacking, such as social issues like forest livelihoods, forest and gender, race and ethnicity, Indigenous knowledge. Also on other region-specific topics and skills. The third recommendation is to support the enrolment of women and ethnic minorities. The fourth recommendation is to focus more effort on developing internships, out-of-school activities, and part-time and other work experience programs with employers that are active in the private sector, and to include these programs and to include monitoring systems in these programs to ensure that students are actually benefiting from and gaining real practical work experience. And the final recommendation is to support and incentivize professional training to equip teachers to provide high quality forest education, including modern digital technology. So some of these things probably starting to sound quite familiar to you in terms of the FRAME project. Okay, so now for the second report, and this one is focused on the regional assessment of forest education in the Asia Pacific region. This report actually preceded the global assessment, but it contributed to it as one of the regions of 6. Likewise, this report is freely available for download, and the website is shown here on the slide. The background to this study is basically the same as the global study that I previously presented, except this report presents the findings of the one specific region, the Asia Pacific, using data specifically from that region from the 2020 Global Forest Education Survey. So this regional level report was actually led by Readiness TC in collaboration with FAO and the International Timber and Trade Organization, and both the FAO Regional Office for Asia Pacific and Readiness TC are associate partners of ours in the FRAME project. The methodological approach used in this report was the same as I described for the Global Outlook for Forest Education Study, but here I'm just going to provide some specific details. So there were 435 respondents of the survey from 35 out of the 44 countries in the region. It also included the same groupings as the global studies in terms of professionals working in organizations, teachers and school administrators from all levels of formal education, and students and recent graduates. There were 62 expert contributions made during the regional consultation of the findings, which was held in February last year. And there was also the participation of these experts from the Asia Pacific region in the International Conference on Forest Education, also in 2021. Okay, so now for the key findings of this regional report. The first thing to point out is that the report found significant gaps in forest education in the Asia Pacific region that threaten to undermine efforts to limit climate change, conserve biodiversity, and achieve sustainable development. The report highlights widespread challenges and discontent among survey respondents with the content of forestry curriculum. Many respondents criticised university curricula and suggested that they need modernisation to encompass a broad range of topics and skills that go far beyond the narrow scope of traditional or classical forestry courses. They stressed the need for increasing coverage in terms of coursework and teaching on non-timber forest products and socio-economic issues relating to forests. They stressed the need for more interdisciplinary approaches and to boost skills relevant to engaging with communities, managing projects, and working collaboratively. There was also, like in the global report, a lack of exposure of students to forests. So this can be through field trips or practical work. So this is despite the widespread recognition that exposure to forests increases interest and learning. Another key finding in the regional report was that graduates lack workplace readiness. There's a lack of practical experience and pathways to forest-related jobs. Students and teachers are unfamiliar with modern approaches and lack relevant knowledge and skills. There's a general lack of experience in forests, and there are significant knowledge gaps of tools and practical skills that are relevant. There are also gaps in soft skills such as facilitation and communication, and limited understanding of social issues such as gender, social inclusion, and forest governance. Another key finding was in terms of forest employment, forest jobs. Students need internships and part-time forest jobs to fill the knowledge and skill gaps previously mentioned, but such opportunities are rare. Gender also affects job prospects, same as was found in the global study, It affects the ability to find a job and also the types of jobs offered, and this is especially the case for women. Forest jobs also suffer from a negative image. Efforts to improve forest education should also go hand in hand, as I mentioned in the global study, to informally educate society about the role of forests and opportunities. So this finding about digital tools is exactly the same as was found globally. So the Asia Pacific was no different. Digital tools are viewed very positively, but they're rarely used effectively. They're valued as learning tools, but they're hardly ever used. There was, again, in the Asia Pacific, sort of a warning that digital tools can't replace practical experience in forests. And there were also limitations for digital learning, same as the global level, in terms of internet accessibility, low levels of digital literacy, and inadequate equipment or unskilled teaching or teachers. This finding about low level of resources dedicated to forestry education is really important. So respondents reported significant gaps in the availability of teaching resources, and these gaps were particularly evident at the primary, secondary, and tertiary levels, but also in the higher, in the postgraduate level with masters and PhDs. This figure demonstrates the availability of resources in forest degree programs at the master's and PhD level across all 6 regions of the world. And as you can see highlighted with this red circle, the Asia Pacific region has the lowest available resources according to the survey respondents. And it's probably even lower in the Asia Pacific region for developing and middle income countries, like as I mentioned, because this average is actually raised by countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. So this is a really big, one of the main sort of differences in the regional findings is this low investment in forest education at this high level. Okay, so now some recommendations to sort of wrap up this report. And these recommendations, again, are just for the universities. In terms of improving curricula, the report states that an update in teaching curricula is needed to reflect the modern understanding of the values and uses of forests and the new technologies used in the forest sector and the changing demands of the job market. There's a need to increase the focus on issues that this study has been found to be lacking, such as social issues, including forest livelihoods, forest and gender, etc. Entrepreneurship and business skills, non-timber forest product development and marketing, multidisciplinary approaches, and international dimensions of forest and forestry at the global and regional scales. Also on economic valuation of forests, and carbon stock assessments and payments for ecosystem services. TOT, training of trainers, training teachers. The report states that there's support needed to incentivize professional training to equip teachers to provide high quality forest education. They recommend increasing student exposure to forest and forest careers and to develop internships and other work experience opportunities with employers that are active in the forestry sector, and also to include such programs, monitoring systems to ensure that students are actually gaining real practical workplace experience and not just making coffee for the supervisor. The report recommends the need to promote international exchanges among faculty and students of university and college forest programs. The report also recommends to establish partnerships with other educational institutions to share resources and to give students access to facilities in partner colleges and universities. So this sounds like South-South cooperation to me. The report also recommends to actively engage with alternative forms of education, both formal and informal. For example, short courses, vocational education, perhaps online courses outside of the university system. This is to save costs and to help students fill gaps in their formal learning. And the report also recommends to address the gender and social inequalities that were demonstrated. And the report recommends to improve access to digital learning tools such as MOOCs, virtual reality, and so on and so forth. And finally, the report recommends to improve the image of the forest sector careers. Okay, so now I just want to go through a bit of a checklist here. When we look at all of these really significant recommendations, I wanted to do a checklist against the FRAME project and to see how we fare in terms of what we're trying to do and achieve in the FRAME project when compared to the recommendations. And it seems, let's just go through one by one. So improving curricula, yes, we've been doing that. Teaching of teachers or training, yes, in fact this course is part of that. Increasing student exposure to forests and forest careers, yes, it's maybe a little bit weak, but at least CMU has a strong program to have internships and so on. Promote international exchanges, yes, we just had the international exchange and there's another round coming. Establish other partnerships with other educational institutions in the region, South-South cooperation. So I think this course you're sitting on now with multiple institutions from the region is a good example of that. I'm not sure about this one, encouraging engagement with alternative forms of education. I'm not sure if people are really doing that so much. Also, well, we do make an effort to ensure gender balance and so on in terms of attending courses, but I'm sure there's room for improvement there. Digital learning tools, yes, we've been doing MOOC courses and improving the image of the forest sector careers. That is beyond the scope of the FRAME project. So surprisingly well we're doing for the FRAME project in terms of addressing these main recommendations in terms of capacity needs, especially when you consider that the FRAME proposal was written at least 1 or 2 years before this was published. So it seems we're on the right track in terms of trying to address the key capacity gaps and needs. Okay, so just to wrap up like a synthesis of these two reports with some conclusions. Addressing the recommendations will help shape responses not only to the challenges of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change, but also challenges that future generations will face that we cannot today foresee. Forest education, as defined in this study, will be central to forests achieving their potential in helping to address these goals, as outlined at the beginning of my presentation. These reports have demonstrated that forest education requires considerable investments, reforms and revitalisation in order to achieve this. And as forests rapidly grow in the political agendas and in the world spotlight, this is perhaps the greatest opportunity than ever before to ensure that forest education gets the attention that it needs. I guess this is the reason why in the last 2 years there have been all of these major reports published. What happens to forests in this next decade and the decade after will significantly influence global progress in tackling the climate and ecological crises and in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But for forests to fulfill their potential, it's essential to have students or workforces that can effectively manage, use, protect, study, monitor, and communicate about forests, as well as having societies that understand and value forests and respect the work of people in forest-related jobs. It's our role and responsibility as forest educators to step up to this challenge and to establish fit-for-purpose teaching and learning environment to meet this challenge. No pressure. So is this the dawn of a new era for forest education? Ladies and gentlemen, it's up to us how we shape the future. And I like to think that the FRAME project is making a small contribution towards meeting these objectives. So that concludes the summary of those two reports. Initially, I was going to present a third report, which is specifically focused on global capacity needs, key gaps, and priorities for restoration to support the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. The details are here. I recommend that you read it. I didn't present the findings because they were basically the same as what I just presented. So there are really common themes running through forestry as a whole, and also specific topics, in this case, forest restoration. I also would like to recommend reading of this paper, which is Innovations in Forest Education, Insights from the Best Practices Global Competition. It's also a very recent publication, and it fits really well to this discussion about what are all the key gaps, because this paper is recommending, how to go about teaching and what innovations in education are the best way to go to achieve the objectives that we've discussed. Okay, so now I would like to stop talking and let you guys talk to each other. So let's have breakout groups where, based on your own university affiliation, if you break into some small groups and just spend 10 to 15 minutes discussing and reflecting on your own university and how it is performing in the context of these key findings and recommendations that I just presented. After that, if just one representative from each group would just provide a very brief summary of the group's discussion. So maybe 2 or 3 minutes from each group to just quickly present. And the final activity, if there is time, is this an open group discussion and reflections. So we can open the floor to anyone who would like to provide their reflections, and specifically about the relevance of this FRAME project that we're all involved in, and what is the role of FRAME or these type of capacity building projects in general. Also, would like to hear some reflections or ideas about future directions for teaching and learning, especially in the context of sustainable forest management, bioeconomy, and lifelong learning. And finally, if you have any ideas or reflections on what are the key challenges of forestry education development, both from your national point of view, your institutional point of view, and globally. So this is open discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections or any questions. Thank you very much. So that concludes the presentation today. Thank you for your attention. I hope you found it interesting. Damrong will share the slides so that you can follow up on these references if you would like. And yes, just to conclude, and I hope you've had a great course, and looking forward to seeing you at the next FRAME meeting. Bye.